Kayla McBride delivers an elbow to Lexie Hull's face, and the foul goes against Hull. That single sequence sent shockwaves through the WNBA community and ignited outrage across social media. Picture the scene. Indiana Fever already limping into Minnesota with half their roster in street clothes, clinging desperately to playoff hopes when one of their last remaining Warriors, Lexie Hull, absorbs a brutal hit. The crowd gasps. The bench stands frozen. The replay makes it clear. McBride's arm swings high and hard, catching Hull flush across the jaw. By every rulebook standard, it's a foul on McBride, maybe even a flagrant. But the referees whistle Hull. Yes, the victim of the contact became the criminal in the official record. This wasn't just a bad call, it was a dagger into the heart of a team already bleeding from endless injuries. Fever fans didn't just see an elbow, they saw disrespect. They saw a dangerous precedent where opponents can weaponize physicality against Indiana with little fear of consequence. The call didn't just tilt one possession, it tilted the integrity of the contest. And as cameras zoomed in on Hull, rubbing her face and staring daggers into the officials, one truth became undeniable. This was bigger than basketball. This was about fairness, safety, and credibility in a league that prides itself on toughness, but should never tolerate recklessness. Across social platforms, hashtags exploded, fans calling it dirty, blatant, and proof of bias. Caitlin Clark, sidelined with injury, was rumored to be seething from the bench, watching yet another teammate take abuse without whistle protection. Commentators, too, didn't mince words. They called it embarrassing. They called it dangerous. And most of all, they called it predictable, because this wasn't the first time, and if nothing changes, it won't be the last. This moment set the tone for everything that followed. Indiana wasn't just fighting opponents, they were fighting the whistle itself. If you want to understand the level of injustice the Fever felt in Minnesota, you have to start with context, and the context is brutal. No other team in the league has been decimated by injuries quite like Indiana. This wasn't a case of one or two stars missing time. By tip-off against the Lynx, it looked more like a MASH unit than a professional basketball roster. Caitlin Clark, the franchise centerpiece and face of the league, sidelined with a stubborn groin injury that has stretched on for over a month. Sophie Cunningham, done for the season with a torn MCL. Ari McDonald, shut down with a fractured foot. Sydney Colson, ACL tear, season over. Chloe Beebe announced just hours before the game that her knee wasn't right, leaving Indiana with yet another hole in the rotation. And even Odyssey Sims, one of the few veterans available, was dragging herself up and down the floor on a leg that barely looked capable of keeping her upright. Think about that for a second. A full starting lineup's worth of players erased. Starters, role players, veterans, young talent gone. What's left is a skeleton crew pieced together with hardship contracts and emergency signings. You've got Shaw Petty flying in midweek and suddenly logging major minutes without time to even learn her teammates' tendencies. Aerial Powers tossed into the fire and told to figure it out on the go. The Fever aren't just shorthanded, they're reinventing themselves every night with duct tape, adrenaline, and sheer willpower. This constant churn doesn't just test stamina, it destroys chemistry. Every missed rotation becomes a glaring weakness because the lineup on the floor hasn't even practiced together. Every substitution isn't about strategy, it's about survival. Who can give us 5 more minutes before collapsing? It's not plug-and-play basketball, it's battlefield triage. And yet, despite all this, Indiana keeps showing up. They keep fighting, they keep clawing their way through games they have no business competing in. That's why the elbow to Lexie Hull stung so deeply. When you're already stretched beyond human limits, you at least expect a fair whistle. You expect the league to protect its players when bodies are breaking down everywhere. Instead, the Fever find themselves punished twice, once by fate and again by the officials. This is the context in which that controversial call happened, a team so battered by injuries that they should barely be standing, yet still refusing to surrender. And then, on top of it all, getting told by referees that even when they take a blow to the face, they'll be the ones blamed for it. The phrase "season from hell" doesn't even capture it anymore. This is survival basketball, and the Fever are being forced to play it every single night. When you strip a team down to its bones, what you're left with isn't just a thinner bench, you're left with a different sport entirely. What the Indiana Fever have been playing these last few weeks is not the clean, polished basketball fans pay to see. It's survival basketball, where every possession feels like an endurance test, and every mistake is magnified under the harsh spotlight of necessity. Take Lexie Hull as the perfect example. Just 2 nights before the infamous elbow incident, she had played a career-high 37 minutes, pouring in 23 points against the very same Minnesota Lynx. That wasn't a coach's luxury call. That was desperation. Indiana literally had no one else. There was no safety net, no scheduled substitution to catch her breath. Hull became an Iron Woman by force, not by choice. And then, less than 48 hours later, she was back in the fire again, battered, bruised, and asked to do it all over. Kelsey Mitchell has been asked to shoulder the impossible burden as well. Once a scoring punch and backcourt assassin, she's now Indiana's lifeline. Night after night, she's forced to fight through traps, create shots out of thin air, and chase opponents on defense. Against Minnesota, she exploded for 26 points, not because she was in rhythm, but because if she didn't, the Fever wouldn't even have stayed in striking distance. Her job description has shifted from playmaker and scorer to please keep us alive. That's not basketball, that's survival mode. Then you have Odyssey Sims, limping around on one good leg, still somehow tasked with running point guard duties because there's literally nobody else. Imagine being signed on a hardship deal, still nursing an injury, and yet immediately asked to play 20-25 minutes in high-intensity playoff race games. That's not a role, that's sacrifice. This kind of strain bleeds into every aspect of the game. Defensive rotations are a half step slow because players are running on fumes. Offensive sets break down because lineups don't have chemistry. And fatigue, it's no longer a factor. It's a permanent state of being. For the Fever, timeouts aren't strategic adjustments, they're lifelines, a chance to simply catch breath and avoid collapse. What makes this all the more painful is that despite the exhaustion, despite the hardship, despite the sheer unfairness of it all, the Fever continue to fight. That's why fans are livid about the officiating. It's one thing to battle fatigue, injuries, and mismatched rotations. But when referees are adding insult to injury literally by punishing players who are already giving more than their bodies should allow, it turns survival basketball into something crueler. Indiana shouldn't have to beg for fairness while running on empty. Yet here they are, grinding out survival basketball every night, knowing that one bad whistle can unravel all that sacrifice. Sports thrive on passion, but passion can turn into outrage when fans begin to believe the system is rigged against them. And that's exactly what boiled over in Minnesota. The Kayla McBride elbow to Lexie Hull wasn't just a missed call, it became the flashpoint for a much bigger conversation about how the Indiana Fever are treated by referees. Fans aren't calling it an isolated mistake anymore. They're calling it a pattern, a disturbing pattern. Think about what actually happened on that play. Lexie Hull, playing hard defense, gets caught by a violent elbow across the face. She collapses, clearly shaken, hand clutching her jaw. The natural reaction? Blow the whistle, review the play, and protect the player. But instead, the foul was called on Hull, the one who got hit. The crowd was stunned. The Fever bench was incensed. And Lexie herself, who has built her entire reputation on being a smart, disciplined defender, stared daggers at the officials, as if to say, "Are you kidding me?" Even when the referees reviewed the play, they only partially corrected the situation. They issued a technical foul but stopped short of holding McBride fully accountable. It was the equivalent of admitting, yes, something wrong happened here, but lacking the courage to actually penalize the right player. The message that sends? If you're wearing an Indiana Fever jersey, don't expect fairness. And this isn't new. Fever fans have been complaining all season about missed calls, swallowed whistles, and a general lack of protection for their players. Every team in the league deals with physical play, but Indiana seems to absorb the hits without getting the whistles. From Clark getting hammered on drives, to Boston absorbing endless shoves in the paint, to Hull literally taking an elbow to the face, the script feels eerily repetitive. Opponents get the benefit of the doubt. Indiana gets the short end of the stick. Social media exploded after this game. Clips of the elbow went viral, with fans demanding to know how on earth Hull could be called for a foul in that situation. Commentators accused referees of endangering players by failing to enforce the rules. And Fever supporters, already fed up with watching their roster decimated by injuries, reached a breaking point. If you're not going to protect the players, one fan wrote, then what's the point of having officials at all? Head coach Stephanie White, usually measured with her words, hinted at the truth in her post-game comments. She described the game as physical, but the subtext was clear. It wasn't just physical, it was reckless, and the referees allowed it to be. That's why the outrage felt so justified. It's not about whining for calls, it's about demanding the same standard be applied no matter what jersey you're wearing. For the Fever, the message from the league's officiating body has been loud and clear. Don't expect protection. And that message, whether intentional or not, is putting players at risk every single night. For Lexie Hull, the elbow to the face wasn't just another play in another grueling game. It was the breaking point, the moment when the polite, quiet competitor who usually lets her play speak for itself finally stood up and demanded answers. And when Hull broke her silence, she didn't mince words. After the game, reporters asked her about the incident and the officiating that followed. Her response was calm, but her frustration was written all over her face. "We put our bodies on the line night in and night out," she said. "The least the league can do is make sure players are protected." It wasn't whining, it wasn't dramatics, it was the raw truth from a player who has been carrying more weight than she ever signed up for. Hull is not Caitlin Clark, the media magnet. She's not Kelsey Mitchell, the go-to scorer. She's not Aliyah Boston, the all-star centerpiece. She's the glue, the defender, the cutter, the hustle player who dives for loose balls and does all the little things that never make the highlight reels. And yet, in this moment, she became the voice of a locker room that has been bruised, battered, and repeatedly disrespected by the whistle. The elbow was bad enough, the foul being called on her was insulting, but the review, the chance for referees to fix the mistake, only made things worse. By refusing to penalize McBride fully, the officials essentially told Hull that her pain didn't matter, that her sacrifice could be brushed aside. That message cut deeper than the elbow itself. Her post-game comments lit a fire among Fever fans. Social media buzzed with praise for her courage to speak up, especially in a league where players are often hesitant to criticize officiating openly for fear of fines. Hull knew the risks of calling out referees, but she also knew silence would be worse. She had to stand up not just for herself, but for her teammates who have endured hit after hit without whistle protection. And here's the reality. Lexie Hull's words carried weight precisely because she's not a player who looks for excuses. She's known as a hard-nosed competitor who accepts tough assignments and plays through pain. For her to finally say enough was a sign that the dam had broken. She wasn't just venting frustration. She was calling for accountability for referees to understand that their decisions don't just affect box scores, they affect bodies, careers, and futures. In that moment, Hull transformed from role player to leader. Her anger became the voice of every Fever fan who has watched this team get punished for playing the game the right way. And her call for consistency wasn't just about Indiana, it was about the league itself. Because if officials can't protect players in these situations, then the credibility of the WNBA takes a hit far bigger than any elbow could deliver. If there's one player keeping the Indiana Fever afloat during this storm of injuries, it's Kelsey Mitchell. Night after night, she's become the anchor, the spark, and the relentless fighter who refuses to let this team sink. Against Minnesota, she poured in 26 points, and it wasn't just scoring for the sake of stats. Every basket Mitchell made was a lifeline, a counterpunch to keep the Fever within striking distance. Without her, Indiana would have been buried by halftime. But here's the cruel reality. Mitchell isn't just being asked to play her role, she's being asked to play everyone's role. With Caitlin Clark out, she has to orchestrate the offense. With Sophie Cunningham gone, she has to absorb defensive responsibilities. With the bench depleted, she has to shoulder marathon minutes. And with the refs swallowing their whistles, she has to finish through contact that other players in other jerseys get bailed out on. It's an impossible task, and yet Mitchell keeps delivering. Watching her in Minnesota was like watching someone drag an entire franchise on her back. Double teams? She split them. Traps at half court? She forced her way through. Contact at the rim? She absorbed it and finished anyway, while waiting for a whistle that never came. She wasn't just scoring, she was fighting a war of attrition, trying to prove that Hart can keep Indiana alive when the math of a shorthanded team says otherwise. What makes Mitchell's performance even more impressive is the mental weight she's carrying. Every night, she knows the Fever's chances rest on her shoulders. She knows there's no safety valve. If she doesn't score, if she doesn't create, if she doesn't lead, the game slips away. That kind of pressure crushes most players. For Mitchell, it seems to fuel her. Her 26 points weren't just numbers, they were a message. I'm not giving up, and neither should we. But even Mitchell's heroics have limits. Basketball is not designed to be played alone. When her legs finally tire, when her shots stop falling, when the traps tighten, there's no second star to step in. That's the cruel truth of survival basketball, no matter how brilliant one player is. Exhaustion and numbers eventually win. Still, what Mitchell has shown in this stretch is nothing short of remarkable. She's playing the best basketball of her career under the worst possible circumstances. She's proving she's not just a scorer, but a leader, a warrior, and the heartbeat of this team. And if the Fever do somehow claw their way into the postseason, her name will be written in bold ink as the reason why. For now, though, her brilliance remains both inspiring and heartbreaking. Inspiring because she's giving Indiana a chance every night. Heartbreaking because without reinforcements and without fair officiating, even her fire may not be enough. When a team is broken down by injuries, suspensions, and controversy, the spotlight often shifts to unlikely heroes, players who weren't supposed to be at the center of the story, but rise to the occasion anyway. For the Fever, that player against Minnesota was Shea Petty. On a night dominated by chaos, Petty injected a surge of energy that reminded fans what resilience really looks like. Coming off the bench, Petty delivered 12 points in just 18 minutes. On paper, that might not sound like a headline, but the context tells a different story. Every single one of those points came at moments when the game threatened to spiral completely out of Indiana's control. She hit a three when Minnesota's crowd was roaring and the Fever looked rattled. She drove hard to the basket when the offense stalled. She played defense with a chip on her shoulder, fighting as if she had something to prove because she did. This wasn't just scoring, it was leadership by example. Petty's intensity stood out because it was contagious. You could see it in how teammates responded. When she knocked down her first shot, Kelsey Mitchell clapped hard and yelled across the court, pumping her up. When she drew contact and finished at the rim, the Fever bench leapt to its feet. In a game where frustration threatened to consume them, Petty's fire reminded Indiana that they weren't finished yet. And here's why it matters. Shea Petty is 34 years old, a veteran who's battled her way through the WNBA as a role player. She knows she's not the star. She knows the headlines will never focus on her first. But that's exactly why her spark means so much. She plays like someone who understands that minutes are precious, opportunities are fleeting, and effort is non-negotiable. She doesn't wait for her name to be called, she forces it into the conversation. In a season where injuries have stripped Indiana of depth, Petty's presence has been invaluable. She doesn't just provide points, she provides stability. She knows how to calm the game down when it gets frantic, and she knows how to pick it up when the pace lags. Against Minnesota, she became the unsung hero who gave the Fever a chance to keep swinging in a fight that felt lopsided from the start. Her performance also sends a larger message about this roster. The Fever are not just a Clark and Boston team. They are filled with fighters like Shea Petty players who can step up when the stars are missing. For fans frustrated by the losses, Petty's spark is a reminder that this team still has heart. And for the locker room, her effort is the kind of fuel that keeps belief alive when the odds say otherwise. When the final buzzer sounded, Indiana didn't walk away with a win. But they walked away knowing that in Petty, they have a veteran who won't let the fight die quietly. Sometimes it's not the superstars' points that define a game, it's the role players' refusal to quit. That was Shea Petty in Minnesota. Physical injuries can be measured. An MRI shows a tear, a scan reveals a fracture, and a timetable is drawn up for return. But the mental toll? That can't be quantified. And right now, it's one of the most devastating battles the Indiana Fever are fighting. Every time Caitlin Clark walks into the arena in street clothes, it sends a ripple through her teammates. Every time Sophie Cunningham is absent from the floor, every time Lexie Hull takes another blow and has to shake it off, the psychological weight grows heavier. These players aren't just losing bodies, they're losing belief, rhythm, and continuity. Basketball is a sport built on chemistry. It thrives on knowing where your teammate will be without even looking, trusting that a pass will be caught, trusting that help defense will come. But with constant changes to the lineup, that chemistry crumbles. Players are forced into roles they didn't prepare for, rotations are shuffled, and what used to feel like second nature becomes guesswork. That uncertainty eats at confidence, and once confidence cracks, even the best teams struggle. What makes it worse for Indiana is the spotlight. With Caitlin Clark on the roster, every game is magnified under the national lens. Every loss is dissected, every mistake goes viral. Imagine being a role player suddenly thrust into starters minutes and knowing that millions of eyes are watching you, not just the fans in the arena, but the critics online, the highlight shows, and the analysts who've already written the narrative of failure. That pressure builds until it feels suffocating. Then there's the fatigue. Losing key players means the remaining healthy ones must play longer minutes, take on tougher assignments, and push their bodies to limits they were never meant to sustain. By the fourth quarter, legs are heavy, minds are foggy, and mistakes multiply. Not because the players don't care, but because the human body and mind can only endure so much. But the deepest mental toll comes from hope, or rather, the erosion of it. Every time the Fever claw their way into a close game only to fall short because they don't have the firepower or the whistle, the players walk back to the locker room feeling like they gave everything, and it still wasn't enough. That is the kind of defeat that doesn't just linger, it festers. It eats at motivation. It tests unity. It whispers the cruel question, why keep fighting if we can't win? And yet, here's the other side of the coin. Adversity like this can also forge something stronger. Teams that survive stretches like these often emerge with a tougher identity. Players discover new depths of resilience. Leaders rise unexpectedly. And when the stars eventually return, the team is sharper, hungrier, and more battle-tested. Right now, though, the Fever are still in the storm. The mental toll of losing Clark, Cunningham, and others is visible in their body language, their frustrations with officiating, and their late-game collapses. They are playing against more than just opponents, they're playing against doubt, and sometimes that's the hardest opponent of all. Every season has its fair share of missed calls and questionable whistles. But what the Indiana Fever are experiencing right now feels like something far bigger, a pattern that has left players, coaches, and fans openly frustrated. After their loss to Minnesota, the officiating controversy once again boiled over, reigniting a conversation that has haunted this franchise all season. Are the Fever being held to a different standard? The evidence is mounting. Against the Lynx, Kelsey Mitchell repeatedly drove into the paint, absorbed heavy contact, and came up empty-handed, no whistles, no free throws. Meanwhile, on the other end, Minnesota players seemed to earn trips to the line on softer fouls. The imbalance was glaring. The Fever attempted just 13 free throws in a game where they attacked the basket relentlessly, while the Lynx nearly doubled that figure. This isn't just about one game, it's become a recurring theme. Caitlin Clark, for all the punishment she takes as a ball handler, has consistently failed to get the same foul calls her peers receive. Aliyah Boston, a post player who often absorbs double teams, finds herself battling through hacks with officials letting play continue. Even veterans like Mitchell and Petty are left throwing their hands up in disbelief after clear fouls are ignored. The result? A growing feeling that the Fever aren't just battling their opponents, they're battling the referees too. And that takes a toll not just physically, but emotionally. When players feel like they have to play perfect basketball to earn even a fair whistle, frustration builds. It spills into their body language, into post-game interviews, and into fan discussions online. The league has taken notice. Social media has exploded with clips showing Clark being shoved without a call, Boston being hammered in the paint, and Mitchell being hacked on drives. Fans across the country are asking the same question: why aren't the Fever getting the same respect as other teams? Some analysts have even suggested that Clark's polarizing presence, loved by many, resented by others, may have subconsciously influenced officiating crews to swallow the whistle rather than feed into her hype. That's where the controversy becomes dangerous. Once players and fans begin to believe the game isn't being called fairly, trust in the league itself starts to erode. For a young franchise trying to rebuild its identity, that mistrust only deepens the wounds of losing. The Fever have tried to take the high road. Head coach Christy Sides has voiced her frustrations carefully, aware that fines follow open criticism of referees. Players bite their tongues in interviews, but the emotion is written all over their faces during games. And if the officiating imbalance continues, this controversy won't just be background noise, it could become a defining narrative of their season. At its core, basketball is supposed to be about competition on equal terms. For Indiana, the sense that those terms aren't equal right now makes every game feel like a battle against more than just the scoreboard. The question looming over this team now isn't just about the next game, it's about survival, direction, and identity. What comes next for the Indiana Fever could define not only their season, but also the trajectory of their rebuild. With Caitlin Clark sidelined, Sophie Cunningham injured, and frustration over officiating mounting, the Fever stand at a crossroads. Either allow the storm to break them, or use it as the crucible that forges their future. First, the immediate reality. The Fever must find ways to compete without their stars. That means leaning even harder on Aliyah Boston as the anchor, trusting Kelsey Mitchell to be the offensive spark, and empowering role players like Shea Petty, Christy Wallace, and Melissa Smith to stretch beyond their usual contributions. In the short term, every game is about scrapping, clawing, and surviving long enough to keep the season respectable. But the bigger picture is more intriguing. Clark's injury, though painful, could become a hidden blessing in disguise. It forces the team to build resilience without her, ensuring they're not overly dependent on her playmaking. When she returns, the Fever could emerge with a more balanced roster, one where every player has been tested under fire and knows how to respond. That's the silver lining. Adversity now might build depth for tomorrow. The front office will also be under the microscope. Do they make a mid-season move to bring in veteran help? Do they trust the current roster to grind through? The way management responds will send a strong message about whether Indiana sees this season as merely a learning year or as the foundation of something much bigger. And then there's the mental reset. The Fever have to decide who they want to be in the face of adversity. Do they crumble under the weight of losses, officiating frustrations, and the absence of their star? Or do they embrace the underdog role, fuel their anger into effort, and make themselves the team nobody wants to face in the second half of the season? For fans, the choice is clear: patience. Rebuilds aren't linear. They're messy, unpredictable, and painful. But they're also where dynasties are born. Clark and Boston are generational talents, the kind of players who can change the course of a franchise. The storm the Fever are in right now, it's just part of the story. 10 years from now, when fans look back at how this team rose to prominence, these growing pains might be remembered as the chapter that hardened them. So what's next? For now, grit, fight, growth. Every game is a chance to redefine themselves. To prove that this season isn't slipping away, it's being written, page by page, in the fire of adversity. Because when Clark returns, when the roster is healthy, and when this team has weathered the storm, the Fever could transform from a struggling young squad into a battle-tested contender. The question is simple: will they survive long enough to see that day?